Gear acquisition syndrome afflicts thousands of guitar players, producers, and engineers every day, ravaging their wallets and leaving their stomachs empty. I'm Ryan with Plexi Studios, and for less than $1 a day, you can help solve this crisis by putting a new pedal on the board of your fellow guitar player, or adding a new rack unit to their 12U touring monstrosity. Funny enough, most of the stuff actually does come out to be about $300 to $400, so it's not too inaccurate of a statement. So yeah, let's drop the sarcasm and let's talk about my favorite gas-killing gear. And no, this is not a Pepto-Bismol commercial. It's definitely not an ASPCA commercial as well. Today I'm talking about some of my favorite pieces of gear that I've bought that basically did everything that I wanted it to do in its category, to the point that I no longer even look at these kind of products anymore. If you've been playing guitar for any extended amount of time, you too have probably encountered the dreaded gear acquisition syndrome, and it's certainly not exclusive to guitar playing, but it's certainly prevalent because a lot of us will put together a guitar rig we're really happy with, and then you might delve into a slightly different genre or just looking for a more perfected tone, and then that'll lead you to a pedal like this, and that'll do everything you want it to do for a while, and then you read that something like this is a bit more versatile, and this famous player is using it, so it's got to be good, right? Then a new toy comes out on the market that just does everything, and it's the bee's knees, you got to have it, and then you repeat the cycle 5 or 6 times over, and you realize you have half a dozen products that do almost the exact same thing, because you are the player that you are and you dial them in almost identically. So with the products I'm going to be talking about today, these are ones that kind of cover all the bases for the category they're in, and honestly, at least for me, makes it to where any addition is just kind of going to be redundant. An important disclaimer to note before I get started: none of the items that we're looking at here today are particularly budget friendly in the traditional sense. We're looking at about $200 on the low end, and that's used pricing. So you're going to have to break out a couple Benjamins for these. But what I can say is all of these are very high value. They do what they do extremely well. In my opinion, most of them do it the best, at least in my experience. And at the very least, this should be a one-time shopping experience for you. Unless you're going on kind of like an extremely fringe side of, say, this certain effect or this amplifier, then I think this is going to cover most people's bases. So keep that in mind. But ultimately, I think buying one of these products is going to yield better results than buying multiple cheaper products to try to compensate for the limitations. So let's get rolling here with number 1, the Fortin Zuul Noise Gate. Yeah, noise gate made it on this list, and as boring as that may sound at first, this is a hell of a noise gate. I've not found anything that, really renders this obsolete. There's a couple other new designs since this was released, a couple years ago. I think that's when I initially reviewed it, and while there's good stuff out there still, I feel no need to look any further because this just nails it. I do like the simplistic approach to this one knob operation. There are certain times where, say, if you're just using this in the effects loop, I think it would be nice to be able to control some other things besides threshold, but when you use this in its optimum setup, it's untouchable, in my opinion. So what you do, in theory, is run this in your amp's effects loop or just post distortion. So, pedal platforms are pretty common nowadays, so if you want to throw this, say, after the last distortion pedal or dirt box or preamp pedal in your chain, and then let the rest of it go to your effects or whatever, you can do that as well. But the real magic comes from this key input, and this requires a buffer splitter pedal. So you can use something like a Boss tuner. You can use JHS as a buffer splitter. Even Fortin has their own spliff. And what do I have in my rack unit? That is the Roach. Yes, because 420 blaze it and all that. But basically you want to split your clean guitar signal, and that's what it uses as a reference to process the noise gate. So it doesn't matter how much distortion you have cascaded, it doesn't matter even if you're playing clean. As long as there's a note coming from your guitar within a certain threshold, it's going to leave the gate open. But as soon as you let off, close. So you'll hear no squeals, absolutely nothing's coming through. This makes the Zuul perhaps the most natural and quickest noise gate that I've personally used in any of my rigs. I've never sat down and compared this to, say, the Decimator G-String side by side. They do kind of reside in the same price category, so I'd assume they're fairly comparable, but ultimately after buying this, I just don't care because it is that good. My only gripe is that I sort of still wish that there had been an output on this key input here. That way you can just continue on with your signal chain. I get why Mike and his team didn't want to do that because this is idiot proof as is. But you know, you got threshold control, you got another dip switch here to kind of control the range, and you set it, forget it. You can play cleans, leads, chunky rhythms. It just works. And that's why it lives in my utility rack shelf there, and it probably won't be going anywhere. If I need another one on a board, I'm just going to buy another because they're that good. The next pedal unit is one of my more recent additions to this collection, and it's only been featured on the channel a handful of times, though certainly not to its full extent. That is the Boss MD500. This is the modulation version of their 500 series of pedals, which released a couple years ago. And Boss have been absolutely killing it the past few years between the Katana series. Even the GT1000 is really respectable for what it is. It's no different with the 500 series of pedals. They did recently come out with the 200s, which is kind of like a neck down version of a lot of these. There's a modulation equivalent. There's like the EQ 200, the Overdrive 200, a lot of which I think would be very well worth having. But then they do have kind of pared back reverb delay, maybe not a reverb. No, they have modulation delay. And they do most of what this does, but whereas I feel the 200s are kind of like more traditional pedals, multi-mode pedals. This is sort of like having a rack unit in a stomp box form, which is absolutely amazing for so many reasons. I really love this no compromise mentality behind the 500 series. It has basically everything any sane player would ever need. You have stereo ins and outs. It can run in mono if you want, or dual mono, where you can run two separate effects at the same time in different signal chains. MIDI in and out, which is a big plus for me. Runs on standard 9-volt, and you've got a USB connection if you want to dive through those really nerdy parameters like me and set up all your presets in a PC or Mac environment. But at the same time, if you don't care about that, you don't have to. If you just want to flip through the presets or set up your own custom patch and flip to one of the several modes included here, you can dial in a great sound with just the front-facing buttons. And then maybe if you want to edit it, go through a couple ones like your low pass, high pass, and things that you can't access on most pedals or rack units or whatever effects these are based on. That's the glory of digital modeling in general. And that's just the 500 series in its own. That's not talking about this specifically. When we get into modulation, just having the Roland Dimension and Boss CE1 emulations are pretty much worth the price of admission to me, because it even includes stuff like the preamp on the CE1, which you rarely ever encounter in any other amp modeler. Not to mention the other 10 or so effects and their several variations thereof that are included here, many of which Boss invented themselves or put out a product before, like the Slicer, which is part of their larger pedal series. You got great stuff like Classic Vibe and tremolos, vibratos, things that normally I wouldn't explore much, but they all sound awesome. You can get some really cool ambient stuff with like the rotary and the ring modulation especially. A lot of exotic stuff on here, but a lot of really, down-to-earth, tactile effects that I think anyone could really stand to use. So that's why I don't feel the need to really look around at modulation pedals anymore, because, over the years, chorus and flanger and phaser, it's not really gotten better. It's just different. So having a digital pedal that you can tweak all these things that you normally couldn't on those older analog or even digital circuits makes it that much cooler for me. So it's going to take a very exotic implementation of modulation to make me ever think about adding to this pedal, and it's going to take even more than that to ever think about replacing it. This is a monster. My middle-of-the-road pick in terms of expense is the legendary SM7B microphone. You've seen me use this on covers. I've used it to mic up guitar cabs. I use it to record narration and some of the screen capture parts of VST tutorials. It's a hard-to-beat microphone for its price, and everyone on YouTube has one for good reason. It's been heard on countless of platinum recordings. It's in basically every major studio out there. And the older SM7 non-B model is held in even higher regard, but you're going to pay a premium for it. For a consumer, prosumer microphone, if I had to have one, it's going to be this one, because again, it does vocals, it does, mic'd up speaker cabs, it does basically everything. And it's not overly harsh, it's not overly bassy. You can definitely get up on it and get some proximity effect. But there's like a built-in high pass filter. I generally keep that engaged. And I would dare say that for guttural vocals or any harsh screaming, anything like that, for heavier genres, this is damn near unbeatable. This or any other large diaphragm neutral dynamic microphone, I think is really the sweet spot, because it doesn't sound overly brittle or harsh on the high end like some condenser and ribbon microphones can. You still have to work around some of the quirks of this mic, but I find they're pretty easy. It's a pretty low skill ceiling to make this thing sound good. Devin Townsend's Ziltoid, every bit of that album was recorded with one of these clean vocals, heavy vocals, and it turned out great. So if you're just now putting together a home studio, this should be one of the first things you buy if you need something for vocals, or like I said, even miking up a guitar cab. Would it be my first pick for acoustic guitar or for a drum set? No. But in terms of its value as a dynamic microphone, damn is this thing nearly untouchable.
Gone, and the world is gone, and we find there's no one that's waiting for the light to come, and we're on our own, and and we find there's no one that's waiting for the light to call.
Now we're only a couple $100 shy of a 4-digit price tag, but for a lot of gigging musicians, I think this one's going to be worth it with the Matrix GT1000 effects. I've been using this quite a bit on the channel recently for both analysis and comparative shootouts. And, you know, this was kind of the brand that I just said, I'm going to pull the trigger on it and give it a shot. I'm sure there's plenty of other ones out there that do a great job as well. But again, this is something that I don't feel the need to ever look for a power amplifier again, at least a neutral one. And I'm absolutely in love with this thing, but not for a lot of the reasons that I think it gets hyped up in the amp modeler world. So the frequency response goes from subsonic to supersonic, so you don't have to worry about replicating things accurately. It's a Class AB MOSFET-driven design. Not that I particularly care about that, as long as it, again, can replicate those sounds without much distortion. And as I proved in one power amp analysis video, you can feed this thing an insanely loud signal, and I couldn't get it to clip at all in terms of input clipping. So no matter what you give this thing, you'll be able to make it louder, which is always good. The 1000 watt rating comes from the mono bridge specification, which for a lot of people is probably fine. But I think the killer feature here is that it's stereo. So if you play in stereo wet, dry, wet, or you're using a direct amp modeler and you split your signal to say you want to go to powered cabinets, then you can do that. And it will power, I think, 325 watts per side at 8 ohms, 500 for 4 ohms. So plenty of juice under the hood without compromising your tone. I personally went with the 1U thickness model. They do make a 2U that is quieter as it uses larger cooling fans, which would be good in like a studio application. But for live, I think this thing is fine because hopefully you're playing loud enough where the whine here doesn't matter whatsoever. It can't get annoying after a while, but again, crank up your amps. That's what they're there for, right? Now, I can't recommend that people use this as like just a plain power amp unless you're going for a strictly solid state sound. If you're using a tube preamp, get a tube rack power amp to complement it. But if you're using an amp modeler or you've got a wet, dry, wet setup where on like Mesa Boogie amps or even this amplifier, there's a line out that takes a low level tap off the speaker jack, you've already got your tube power amp sound. So you put it through something like this and doesn't color it anymore, which is what you want. It basically multiplies your tone and you can send it through rack units and post-processing, all that good stuff. So while only a small portion of this audience will ever need to play as loud as this amplifier gets, and only a small portion of them would probably need something like this to achieve that with their setup, I still think this is kind of a one and done purchase. Again, there's other companies that just from what I've heard sound like they make some pretty good stuff, and you'll probably be equally as happy. For me, I went with this just based on the reputation, and I definitely don't regret it. I would put this through touring hell and back and come home with it and happily play through it once again. If you were a part of the first few thousand subscribers to this channel, first of all, huge thank you because you're still watching. But second, you probably saw my #1 pick for this video. That is the Fractal Audio AX8, my definitive amp modeler, even if it's not the definitive amp modeler out there anymore, because even just looking in the Fractal ecosystem, you know, the AX8 and the upcoming FM3, assuming that does release at some point, absolutely devour this thing in terms of processing power, at least the AX does, in terms of quality of life features, accuracy and amp modeling, all the improvements. It's great stuff. And if you're going to buy new, obviously that is the way to go, especially with the way these are keeping their used prices rather high. But as someone who already owns this and who finds this device to be overkill in 95% of the situations that I need to use it in, I don't feel a need to upgrade. And that's kind of the downside I was talking about in earlier videos, where if as a manufacturer you make something that's so good as Logitech did a long time ago, at least in technology years a long time ago, they made a couple mouse models that were so reliable and so good that people quit buying new mice. So you're almost at odds with yourself. And that's kind of what I feel like the AX8 does. Yes, there are things about it that, you know, are legitimate downfalls compared to some of its modern day, I say modern again, as if this was released 10 years ago. It was only 4, but, you know, a lot has improved since then. But even then, the way that my workflow demands this to work, the way that I find this to be most useful in terms of creativity, in terms of jamming at, you know, bedroom levels or through headphones, I don't need anything better, because it's still amazing. I mean, I can plug in and forget that I'm playing through something digital, and that's what it's all about to me. I recorded Children of the Stars, my first released EP. All the strings were through this processor, and at no point did I feel creatively or technologically limited because of it. And I could absolutely happily do the same thing on the next ones. I just like analog gear as well, so probably won't use it that way. And if I miraculously get back into gigging at some point, it's going to take something truly revolutionary, not evolutionary, to make me want to switch from this. And I'll always keep this at the very least as a backup unit, because it just sounds freaking incredible. It still does, and you know, unless something dies on it and I just can't get it repaired, it's not going anywhere. So I guess this is all to say, find yourself an amp modeler that you're happy with, and you probably don't need any of the other stuff on this list. For me, it was the AX8. For you, it might be something different, and that's okay. So that will conclude today's My Top 5. Any other questions and comments, as always, please leave them down below. And thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.